Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. As you can probably tell from the title of this video, we are gonna be testing out a dupe of the Anastasia Beverly Hills Riviera palette, which is called W7 whatever, totally random. There is another palette called whatever made by Colourpop. That's a completely different story. Today's video is about the W7 version, which looks like this. You can definitely tell that they were trying to target teenagers with this palette. The aesthetics of this palette is really youthful. You can see the neon version of all of these emojis, kind of using the shades from the actual palette. I think this was a really smart idea from them, because this is a really colorful palette and it's definitely a good idea to target teenagers with this, because this is their price point and they probably would really enjoy the color theme of this palette as well. This is the Anastasia Beverly Hills Riviera palette. I'm sure you guys have all seen this already. This is a palette that came out last year, around the same time last year or a little bit earlier in the year. This was definitely their summer palette and I immediately fell in love with it. I really wanted to have it, but I wouldn't say I couldn't afford it. I probably could have afforded it, but I just wanted other things, to be honest, and I just had so many other palettes to play with at the time, and it was also £46. For me, there's still a lot of money for an eyeshadow palette, especially knowing how many other eyeshadow palettes are out there for a lot less money, such as Juvia's Place eyeshadow palette. But then it ended up in my local TK Maxx for £25, and I was like, what the hell, I do really want this palette, and £25 sounds a lot better than 46. So I picked it up and I honestly don't regret it. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. I've already done a one palette 3 looks video on my channel. If you haven't seen it yet, go and check it out. I find this palette really versatile. You can create so many different looks with these shades. It's really inspiring for me. I absolutely love it. As you can tell from the name and from the look of the palette, Anastasia imagined this to be a summery, happy, colorful eyeshadow palette, and I think these shades are absolutely gorgeous. I initially didn't really like this yellow shade when I first saw this palette. I was thinking, oh my god, I wish they just put like a darker blue in it or something, because this shade is definitely my number one from this palette. But honestly, after using it, I really don't mind. It is a beautiful yellow shade. If you apply it all over your lid, it's absolutely gorgeous. So yeah, I really love this palette. It is £46. The palette itself was made in the USA. The brush that comes with all of the Anastasia palettes was made in the People's Republic of China, however. The amount of product you get in this palette is quite standard for Anastasia. It's actually slightly more than her other palettes. The palettes I own from her are Modern Renaissance, Subculture, Soft Glam and Norvina. The previous palettes all had 0.70, 0.71 grams of product. This one actually has 0.73, so it's slightly more, but pretty much the standard Anastasia amount of product. 0.73 grams of product per pen times 14 pens adds up to 10.22 grams of product in total. Whilst in the W7 palette you get 10.50 grams of product, so slightly more, but pretty much the same. That palette was made in the People's Republic of China and officially cost £6.95. However, if you go to places like B&M or TK Maxx, you can pick it up for £4. Unfortunately, I honestly don't know how much it costs in the USA. W7 is a British brand, so I believe they're much more widely available here in the UK. And one more thing to mention, they both have 18 months shelf life. Just to show you very quickly how they compare to each other, the shades are in exactly the same order. Obviously they all have different names, but if you are watching any Riviera palette review or tutorial, you will be pretty much able to find straight away which shade dupes which shade. I'm gonna very quickly insert for you the swatches I did of these two eyeshadow palettes. As you can see, the shimmery shades, which are basically the first row, very similarly to the Norvina palette that also had the shimmery shades in the top row and the matte shades in the bottom row, and they are very similar when you're doing finger swatches. The only thing is the W7 version doesn't have such a good color payoff when you actually apply it on the eye. In today's eye makeup look, I had to get some help from the Inglot Duraline to intensify the shimmery shade because the W7 version didn't look that good. Looking at the matte shades, you can definitely tell that they're just a little bit less opaque and less pigmented than the original shades from the Riviera palette. However, if you work with them, you can build them up slightly. I would definitely say that the staying power and the opacity of these matte shades are quite good for a dupe palette, and I'm really happy to see how much these dupe palettes are evolving. They are honestly getting better and better. You guys wouldn't believe what a shitty brand W7 was about 6-7 years ago. When they had their dupes of the Naked palettes, I remember I purchased the Naked 2 dupe from them and it was an absolute waste of money. It felt so cheap, it was such bad quality, you didn't get any color payoff. I absolutely hated it, and that is actually a reason why I didn't really try anything else from them after, until I started purchasing the dupes of all of these ABH palettes from them, and I realized that they're really not that bad anymore. I actually really quite like their eyeshadow palette dupes right now. They do have some dupes of other palettes as well. Like I recently did a review of the W7 Socialite palette, which was a Huda Beauty New Nude palette dupe, and that was actually one of the best dupes on the market and it looked gorgeous. It was a really good palette. So W7 is definitely something to keep an eye out for. Looking at today's look, I think they pretty much look identical. The dupe side is maybe not as detailed, not as beautifully done as the original one. Of course, if you have a more expensive palette, it's easier to work with. The shades are doing exactly what you want. That's kind of what you expect for your money. But if you cannot afford that and you want something like the Riviera palette, I definitely think that this W7 palette is something to keep in mind. I have another dupe that's coming on my channel very soon for the Riviera palette, and that is the Vacay palette from the brand Technique. Technique is not something that I have ever reviewed before, so I'm gonna be very excited to give a try to this palette. I found this palette amongst other ABH palette dupes from Technique when I visited TK Maxx, and I picked up a couple of them. So even though I already put my Modern Renaissance and my Subculture palettes to rest, I'm gonna bring them back home because I wanna test out the Technique dupe for them as well. So this is something that's gonna come very soon, and right after that I'm gonna do the Subculture and the Modern Renaissance dupe from them as well. I've never really tried anything from Technique before, so I'm very excited to do that. And to be honest, these are the only two dupes that I can see on the market for the Riviera palette. I'm gonna have another video coming on my channel soon that's also gonna be comparing the Anastasia Beverly Hills Riviera palette to another palette which is not an obvious dupe, but I feel like it's very similar and a lot better price point, and some shades are a lot better quality as well, and that is the Juvia's Place Magic palette. Now this doesn't seem like an obvious dupe at first, but I just feel like some of these shades are so similar to the ones in the ABH palette that I just really want to test them out side by side. This color, it looks exactly like Seaside. This one looks like the gold shade in the ABH palette. So I'm gonna have a video coming where I'm gonna compare this one to the Riviera palette. I think there's something that hasn't been done so far, and I'm always trying to film videos that haven't been done already, because why repeat something that's been done? Why not try to do something a bit different? Because you might be the person answering someone's question with your video. So anyway, back to topic. This is one of the only 2 dupes for the Riviera palette that I could find on the market, and it's a really good one, but I won't be able to tell you until we test out the Technique palette if I think this one is worth the price or not, because the Technique one is slightly cheaper and you get twice as much product. To be specific, 22.5 grams of product, which is more than double. So I'm gonna be very interested to see how that one performs, because if that one outperforms this one, then I don't really want to recommend this one instead of that. So I'm gonna leave it right there for today, and I'm only gonna be able to tell you if I think this palette is worth the price or not once we tested out that one as well. So if you haven't already, this is the perfect time to subscribe to my channel to make sure you're not gonna miss out that video. Anyhow, back to the W7 palette. I wanna jump right into creating this eye makeup look to show you how the W7 palette performed in live action. And once we're done with that, we're gonna come back here, wrap up today's video, and I'm gonna tell you my final thoughts about this W7 palette. Alright, so as always, I'm going to be using the more expensive palette on this side of the face, which is today going to be the Anastasia Beverly Hills Riviera palette. And the more affordable palette on this side of the face, which is today going to be the W7 Whatever Totally Random palette. I already primed my eyes with some MAC Painterly Paint Pot, and now I'm gonna go and very quickly add some shadow shields before we start applying the eyeshadow. So I want to create a very simple eye makeup look today, a little bit sultry purple eye makeup look. And for that we need to start with the more neutral shades to warm up the eyes and give them some depths first. So the very first shade we're going to be working with is going to be Coastline, and we're going to add this to the crease. I think this Anastasia palette is again a little bit more on the powdery side. So if you didn't like that about the Subculture palette, you will have the same experience with this much shades. I have to say though that they are very pigmented and very easy to blend. So for me it's not a big issue. I think that's just how they are made. If they are less hardly pressed, they are going to have some fallout, but if they would be more hardly pressed, you would have a more difficult job to actually apply the product. So I think this is just a compromise you have to make. I do really like the shade Coastline. I think it's very flattering, especially on my skin tone. Obviously, it's gonna be very easy to work with the Whatever palette because the shades are in exactly the same order. So the shade we're taking here is called Peachy. So far, I would say that this is definitely less of a red shade, more of a peachy shade, which means that the name for this shade was absolutely spot on. However, the two sides don't really match right now. This shade is definitely a lot darker, gives more depth to the eye. I believe that the next shade we apply on top of this though is going to fix this issue, but I would definitely say that Coastline and Peachy are very different colors. We're gonna jump into the darkest shade now, which in the Riviera palette is called Palm, and we're gonna darken up the outer corner and a little bit the inner corner with this shade. I take it on a pencil brush and I'm not blending it that much, I'm just applying it with a tapping motion, because obviously this is not a blending brush, so I just added basically where I want it to be, and we're gonna use another shade to kind of blend this one out. The shade Palm very much reminds me of Cypress Umber. I think this one is maybe just a little bit less of a cool toned shade. I think this is maybe a little bit more rich, especially in the pan, but I think it's super similar. They could have called it the same, but I guess they wanted something that fits more into this tropical theme, and that's why they call it Palm, but it's pretty much the same as Cypress Umber. So I add a little bit in my inner corner and I connect it on the top, but don't worry, this is not how this is going to look. I'm just trying to darken up the areas where I'm looking for more depth, and I'm not blending it out yet because, like I said, we're gonna take another shade in a second to blend out this shade. So I'm gonna jump onto the other side now and do the same thing. On the whatever side, this shade is called Chippy, and in the pan it looks significantly lighter, and I must say that I had to scrape off this shade to be able to actually swatch it with my finger, because it's just one of those shades that creates this barrier on the top. So I'm not sure how much I will be able to apply this shade. I hope it's going to work, but this is normally a very drugstore palette kind of a thing to do, that the darker shades you normally have difficulties building them up and even just applying them to the eye, because normally the darker shades, especially if they are matte, they don't really perform well in drugstore makeup. But I might have just proven myself wrong already, because this so far does not look bad at all. I don't know if I will be able to build this up actually any more than this though, because I think it's gonna be one of those deals when you can apply the initial layer very well and blend it if you want, but you can't build on top of it. Okay, so like I said, we're gonna start blending this out now using the shade Monte Carlo. I'm using a brush that's not a pencil brush, but not really a crease brush either. It's almost like in between. It's called a petty crease brush. So it's perfect to blend smaller areas, gives you more control. I only really blend out the part that's above the crease though, using the shade Monte Carlo, because I'm gonna be using another shade on the actual lid. So it would be basically useless to use this shade there, because we don't want this color on the lid. On the W7 side, this shade is called Bubbles. Bubbles looks a lot more similar to Monte Carlo than the other pinky peachy shade did. So as I was hoping, it does help save this look. I think right now they look quite similar. I wouldn't call it identical, but they look really similar. So back to the Riviera palette. We are going to take now Mediterranean, and I'm going to take it on this small detail shader brush, And just make sure I only apply it where I intended it to go, because this is really gonna be the main attraction of this look. Alright, we're not finished with that shade yet. We are gonna go back and intensify it a bit more with some Inglot Duraline in a second, but I want to jump onto the other side now and do the same. In the Whatever palette, this shade is called Fake ID, and I'm very curious how is this going to apply. So far it definitely looks less opaque than the other shade. However, I have noticed that with these drugstore palettes, sometimes adding a bit of Duraline can completely transform the way the shade works. So right now this side is definitely losing against the ABH side, but we'll see how it's gonna look after a bit of Duraline, because that might change that outcome completely. I'm experiencing quite a lot of fallout from this shade on both sides, but definitely more on the W7 side. Okay, so now to intensify and kind of like sharpen up this look a little bit more, I'm gonna take Palm again, and I'm adding some more of Palm, especially in the outer corner, kind of blending it into each other with Mediterranean, and bring it a bit up as well to sharpen up the crease. I just feel like the shade Palm and Mediterranean look so good together. Once again, on the W7 side, this shade is called Chippy, and let's see if we can build on top of Chippy, because obviously we already placed this shade here, and now it needs to go on top of Fake ID and on top of itself. So I'm gonna be very curious to see if it can do that. Okay, well, it definitely did something, but I don't know if I'm quite happy with what it did. Anyways, we are gonna use now the same purple shade again, but we're gonna add some Inglot Duraline to it. Okay, let's see first on the ABH side. I think that looks quite beautiful. And now let's see the W7 side, because right now the side looks quite different. Oh yes, this is what I said, guys. Once you add the Inglot Duraline to these dupe palettes, sometimes miracle happens. This shade now looks so much more intense than it did without the Duraline. You really cannot even compare it to what it was before. It's almost identical now. And now we're pretty much done. I'm just gonna take some of Monte Carlo on the brush that I used to darken up the outer corner, and I'm just gonna apply it under my eye with the little bit of leftover I have of the dark brown shade. And I'm doing the same thing on the W7 side, taking some of Bubbles. Unfortunately, this shade now again had some fallout on the face, so I'm gonna clean it up and I'm gonna finish the rest of the makeup, and then I'm gonna be back. We're just gonna apply a little bit of the white shade in the inner corner, but otherwise we're technically done. So I'm gonna be back in a second. Alright, so we're technically done. I'm just gonna take a little bit of Sails and add that to my inner corner. I know this is a matte white shade, but it still works in your inner corner. And in the W7 palette, this shade is called Blank Stare. So now I'm taking some of that. This is definitely not as pigmented as the Anastasia version was, but still works. I don't know what you guys think. I think they look technically identical, but the W7 side received a massive help from the Inglot Duraline. It looked quite dull and badly done. Before that helped to liquefy and intensify that purple shade that we used on most of the lid. The brown shade kind of worked. It definitely didn't build up as dark as the original one did. And as I said, the very first shade was very, very different from the original. Those were the shades Coastline and Peachy. Peachy was definitely very, very different than the original one, but as you can see, the end result is quite good, I would say anyway. The dupe palette is still not perfect. I would say that it's harder to work with it. It's harder to place the shade where you want it to go. This is quite a general problem with most of these dupe palettes, so it's definitely nothing new. But regardless, it's definitely still something worth mentioning because there are so many different dupe palettes now that you can really find spot on ones if you just keep looking. So if I find anything wrong with any of these palettes, I like to mention that, even if it's not a massive issue. But yeah, anyway, this is the original one. I think it turned out gorgeous. I definitely didn't manage to do the exact same thing on the dupe side, but I feel like it's fair enough, especially for the price. It's really, really similar. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, because I would love to have you here. And until next time, take care of yourself. I will see you very soon. Bye.